The ultrasound image was still in her bag when Park Dae-hyun's hand closed around her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, just enough to stop her. Amara Bennett had made it 17 steps from the clinic door before he appeared emerging from a black SUV parked at the wrong angle, his face blank with the particular blankness of a man who has spent years learning to show nothing. "Mr. Kang would like you to come back," he said. Not a request. The phrasing was polite. Everything about Dae-hyun was polite. The way a locked door is polite. It doesn't argue with you. It simply doesn't open. Amara looked down at his hand on her wrist. Then she looked up at him. "I have a doctor's appointment." "You've already had it." He knew. He'd been waiting the whole time. Which meant Min-jae had known where she was before she even walked through those clinic doors. Before she sat in that paper-covered chair and watched the technician move a wand across her stomach and heard, for the first time, the sound of a heartbeat that was not her own. If you have ever felt completely trapped by someone who claims to love you, subscribe now, hit that like button, and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Stay until the end. You won't see the twist coming. 8 months before Dae-hyun's hand found her wrist, Amara Bennett was carrying a tray of ossobuco to table 14 when she walked directly into a man she had never seen before. Not into him, exactly. Into his shoulder, the tray tilted. One glass of Barolo slid toward the edge, and the man sitting beside Min-jae, a thick-necked lieutenant named Cho, who would later become important to this story for entirely wrong reasons, stood up so fast his chair scraped the marble floor. "Watch what you're doing." Cho's voice was low and controlled and somehow worse for it. Amara steadied the tray. The glass hadn't fallen. The wine hadn't spilled. She'd caught it barely, her wrist aching with the effort. And now she stood, looking at Cho's expression, and understood that the near miss wasn't the problem. She was the problem. Young, black, female, working a double shift in heels that were half a size too small because the restaurant only had 2 sizes and she needed the job badly enough not to complain. "I'm sorry," she said, professionally. No tremor in it. "You should be more careful." Cho stepped closer. The table went quiet. And then a different voice measured, unhurried, carrying more authority in its flatness than Cho's posturing ever could. "Sit down, Dae-hyun." A pause in Cho. "That's enough." The man who spoke hadn't looked up from the document in front of him. He was 40 years old, Korean, wearing a charcoal suit with no tie, saying something that apparently interested him more than the small drama happening 3 feet from his elbow. When he finally did look up, his eyes went first to the tray, then to Amara's wrist where she was still gripping the stem of the tilted glass, and then to her face. He didn't smile. He said, "Are you all right?" Amara said, "Yes, sir. I'm sorry for the disruption. You didn't cause one." He glanced at Cho without expression. He did. That was how Amara met Kang Min-jae. She didn't think much of it afterward. Men like that, the kind who had entire tables go quiet when they spoke occasionally, showed basic human decency and expected to be remembered for it. She thanked him, resettled the tray, finished her shift, and went home to the 1-bedroom apartment she shared with 2 roommates and a persistent mold problem near the bathroom ceiling. She needed money badly enough that the details of who ate at table 14 didn't matter. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have understood that night, was that Min-jae had watched her walk away and said something quietly to Dae-hyun that Dae-hyun wrote down without comment. 3 days later, his assistant called her. The offer was for a household management position at a private estate outside Seattle. The pay was more than she made in 2 months of double shifts. The apartment had a mold problem and a roommate who played bass guitar after midnight, and Amara's heart condition, a mitral valve irregularity she'd managed since she was 17, made the double shifts harder than she admitted to anyone. She said yes before the assistant finished explaining the benefits. She told herself it was practical. In the first week, she barely saw Min-jae at all. The estate ran like a machine staff, security, schedules, maintenance protocols that Amara quickly learned to navigate. She was good at organizing things. Better than the previous coordinator, apparently, because Min-jae's head housekeeper mentioned it with grudging approval after Amara restructured the weekly supply orders and cut waste by 30%. The second week, Min-jae noticed, not in a way that was obvious. He didn't compliment her. He didn't seek her out. but she started seeing him in rooms she hadn't expected. The kitchen at 7 in the morning, reading with a coffee she learned to prepare without being told. Black, no sugar, never too hot. The library where he worked late and sometimes didn't leave until past midnight. He asked her opinion about things. Not personal things, practical ones. She found she had opinions she hadn't realized she'd formed. He listened, not performing listening, not waiting for her to stop talking, actually processing what she said and then responding to what she actually meant, not to what he'd expected her to say. It was disorienting. Amara had spent most of her working life in environments where her job was to be efficient and invisible. Min-jae seemed actively uninterested in her being invisible. The third week, she caught herself thinking about him between tasks in a way that annoyed her. By the second month, she'd stopped pretending that what she felt was uncomplicated. The first time Min-jae touched her, it was her hand. He was correcting something she'd marked in the estate's vendor records. A small error in a shipping manifest, and he reached past her to point at the figure, and his fingers closed briefly over hers to guide the pen. He paused. She felt it. The slight hesitation in him that she'd never seen in any other context, Nasinjae, who never hesitated about anything. He said, "You've been here 2 months and you already run this estate better than anyone I've employed in 10 years. The systems weren't complicated," Amara said. "They just needed someone to follow through on them. That's rarer than you think." She looked at him. He looked at her. And neither of them moved for long enough that the silence started to mean something. What happened between them after that was not a seduction in any clean directional sense. It was more like two people standing on opposite sides of a line that kept moving until one day neither of them could locate it. Min-jae gave her things, not aggressively. Not the way powerful men sometimes threw gifts at women like weapons. He noticed what she needed, and it appeared. A better chair for the desk where she worked long hours. The specific kind of tea that helped with her heart palpitations, which she'd mentioned once in passing. Car she hadn't asked for. She should have recognized what was happening. The accumulation of it. The way her world was slowly being replaced with a world that Min-jae controlled. But she was 24 and tired in the bone-deep way that comes from years of managing survival alone. And when someone genuinely powerful decided to make her life easier, some part of her, the part that had been white-knuckling through every month since she was 18, simply exhaled. That exhale cost her. She understood what Min-jae was in broad strokes within the first 3 months. The men who came and went. The conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. The shipments that moved through the estate's logistics arm, with paperwork that didn't quite add up. She asked him directly, one evening while they were eating together in the kitchen, because neither of them had felt like the formality of the dining room. "What do you actually do?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Shipping, logistics, real estate, and the other things. He set down his chopsticks. Looked at her with that flat measuring regard she'd come to understand, meant he was deciding how much to give her. "I have interests in several industries," he said finally. "Some are more complicated than others. Are the complicated ones going to put me in danger?" "No, that's not what I asked." A pause. Something moved across his face. Not quite respect. Something adjacent to it. "So you're safer inside my organization than you'd be outside it. I'll make sure of that." She should have left then. She didn't. Later she would try to understand why. It wasn't naivety. She'd been around enough hard circumstances to know when she was hearing a careful half-truth. It wasn't even love, not yet. It was something more uncomfortable. She trusted his competence, even when she couldn't trust his honesty. And in her experience, those two things rarely came together. She found out she was pregnant on a Tuesday morning in January, in the bathroom, the estate east, staring at a test she'd driven 40 minutes to buy, at a pharmacy she'd never been to before. Her first feeling was not fear. It was a strange animal certainty, like something settling into place that she hadn't known was out of alignment. Her second feeling arrived about 30 seconds later, and it was terror. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and did the arithmetic of her situation with the clear-eyed efficiency she'd been applying to problems since childhood. She was 24. She was pregnant by a man who ran a criminal organization that stretched across 2 continents. She lived on his property, drove his cars, spent his money, and had no bank account he didn't know about, no apartment he hadn't arranged, No personal independence she had not allowed to quietly dissolve over 8 months of being comfortable. She had no exit. She had not noticed herself closing every door behind her until this moment when she needed one. She said nothing to Min-jae. Not that day, not that week. She bought prenatal vitamins at a different pharmacy, paid cash, hid them in a box of tampons in the bathroom cabinet, because she'd noticed early that he never went through that particular cabinet. She started researching Vancouver. She had a contact there, a prenatal specialist who had been recommended through an anonymous online forum for women with congenital heart conditions. Dr. Elaine Souza, who ran a private practice and had experience managing pregnancies complicated by cardiac irregularities. Kind of care Amara would need. The kind of care she could not ask for in Seattle without Min-jae knowing about it immediately. She opened a new account using an old form of her name, her grandmother's spelling of Bennett, one letter different, and began moving small amounts of money through it. Cash from shifts she picked up through Grace Chen, a Vancouver cafe owner she found through an online community board, who was looking for experienced help and didn't ask questions. It took 11 weeks to save enough. It took 3 more to build a route out. She found this surveillance blind spot in the estate's east service wing by accident, a gap in camera coverage caused by a maintenance light that nobody had gotten around to replacing. She started timing the gap, testing it, walking past it casually enough that nobody flagged it. She found out that the secondary gate guard rotated on a pattern and that the Tuesday morning shift was held by a young man named Brennan, who had a weakness for being helpful to women who seemed slightly distressed. She did not feel good about that. She used it anyway. Her child's life outranked her discomfort about manipulating a gate guard. On the morning she finally chose to leave, Min-jae was already awake when she came into the kitchen. She had expected him to be in his study. He was sitting at the kitchen table instead, and her carefully maintained composure nearly cracked before she reached the counter. "You're up early," she said. "I slept badly." He watched her move to the tea kettle. "I replaced your coffee. You've been nauseous in the mornings." She kept her back to him. The kettle, the mug, the tea bag from the canister he had stocked for her. Her hands did not shake, which upset her, because every other part of her was just tired, she said. She could feel him looking at her back. He said nothing more. But when the senior security team assembled for the syndicate meeting that afternoon and the motorcade pulled out through the estate gates, Amara stood at the window and understood that this was the only gap she would ever get. She waited 15 minutes. Then she changed her clothes, retrieved the cash and burner phone from beneath the loose board in her closet floor, and walked toward the East Service wing. She did not look back. She had learned finally, too late, and just in time, that looking back was how they kept you. The bus to the transit station smelled like wet coats and fast food, and Amara sat near the back with her duffel on her lap and her heart doing the irregular thing it did when she was afraid, slight temptation that had been with her since 17 and which she'd learned to breathe through. She changed routes 4 times, bought a different ticket than the one she'd researched, changed again at a junction point where she knew the camera coverage was poor from studying city infrastructure maps for the past 3 weeks. She was 90 minutes from the border when she saw Dae-hyun. He was standing beside a black SUV at the transit station entrance, phone against his ear, face in the direction of the main doors. She had maybe 4 seconds before he turned. She went through a side exit, crossed a parking structure, flagged down a cab going the wrong direction entirely, rode it 6 blocks, then walked another 8 before catching the right connection. Her hands were shaking now, but she made the border. And when the crossing officer stamped her passport and handed it back and said, "Welcome to Canada," Amara pressed the edge of it to her sternum and breathed. Vancouver was cold and ordinary, and the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The apartment was small. The cafe job paid enough for groceries and rent. Grace Chen was a compact, watchful woman who made excellent congee and never once asked Amara who she was running from, which was the most generous thing anyone had done for her in a year. At 4 in the morning on her 3rd day in Vancouver, Amara sat on the floor of her small bathroom and cried for 40 minutes. Not because she was sad, because she was not in immediate danger, for what felt like the first time in months, and her body didn't know what to do with the absence of threat. She cried until her chest hurt. Then she washed her face and went to bed. She had a prenatal appointment in 2 days. The ultrasound was scheduled for week 16. Doctor Souza was precise and unhurried, and spoke to Amara like she was an intelligent adult, which should not have been notable but was. She explained the images carefully. The measurements. The way the mitral valve irregularity would need monitoring, but was not presenting as high risk at this stage. And then the image came into focus. Amara had read about this. She'd known intellectually what an ultrasound looked like. She was not prepared for the specific reality of seeing curved fingers no larger than her thumbnail, a spine like a string of pearls, and the fast, rhythmic flutter that was her child's heart. She was not a woman who cried easily. She cried. "Everything looks excellent, doctor," Souza said. Not perfunctory, genuine. 16 weeks and measuring well. Amara nodded and pressed her knuckles to her mouth and sound thought, "I did this. I got here. I got us here." 17 days after her escape, for the first time she began to believe she was going to be all right. The roses arrived at the cafe on a Thursday. 24 of them, crimson, in a crystal vase that Amara recognized before she even fully processed what she was looking at. The same heavy-based baccarat vases that Min-jae kept throughout the estate. A specific style he'd brought back from a business trip to Paris 3 years before she worked for him. Card was handwritten. His handwriting, she knew it as well as her own by now. Penthouse, 80 tonight. Come home. This has gone on long enough. Grace looked at the vase, then at Amara's face, and said nothing. Amara stood in the cafe kitchen with the card in her hand and felt the 17 days of careful ordinary life dissolve like paper in water. The apartment, the bus routes, the prenatal appointment she'd started building her future around. He'd known, the whole time. He had let her build a life here, and then sent roses to tell her that it didn't belong to her. She left through the back. She spent 3 hours moving through Vancouver with no destination buses and walking and doubling back, looking for some gap in his reach that she could squeeze through, some city or country or arrangement of distance that would put her past the edge of what he could find. She found nothing. At 8:17 that night, Amara pushed open the door of the hotel penthouse and walked into the room where Kang Min-jae was waiting. He was standing at the window, looking at the city lights below. He didn't turn around when she came in. He said, "I wondered if you'd come." Amara dropped the card on the table between them. "How long?" she said. Her voice was steady. She needed it to be. He turned then, looked at her with something she could not immediately name. Not satisfaction, not anger. Something quieter and harder to manage. "Since the first morning," he said. She stared at him. "Your passport triggered an alert at the border. I've known where you were since the second day. And the roses. I needed to know if you'd run again or if you'd come." He paused. "You came. You didn't give me anywhere to run to." "No," he said. "I didn't." He looked at her then, with his hands at his sides, and his face open in a way she had almost never seen on him, stripped of the performance of authority, stripped of everything that made boardrooms and lieutenants go quiet. He looked afraid. "Amara," he said, "tell me about the appointment." She hadn't told him. She hadn't told anyone. The ultrasound image was in her bag. She hadn't even taken it out yet, hadn't been able to make herself look at it again since the roses appeared. She reached into the bag. Her hand found the photograph. She set it on the table between them. Min-jae looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he walked around the table and stood before her, and what he did next, what the feared and calculating and utterly controlled Kang Min-jae did in that silent penthouse room, was drop to his knees. His hand moved slowly to the barely visible curve of her stomach. He did not ask permission. She did not stop him. His palm rested there, and he stared at it, and his face was the face of a man confronting something he had no language for. "How far?" he said. Quiet, not commanding. Actually asking. 16 weeks, Amara said. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, before everything that came next, before the negotiations and the ultimatums and the long, brutal work of building something real from the wreckage of what they'd been, Amara looked at the top of his bowed head and understood that this was not the ending of the story she'd been trying to escape. It was the beginning of an entirely different one. Min-jae stayed on his knees for longer than Amara expected. She had prepared herself for a dozen versions of this confrontation. Cold authority, the negotiated ultimatum, the quiet display of power that reminded her exactly how many exits he controlled. She had not prepared for this. For a man who ran criminal operations to two continents, pressing his palm against her stomach with the careful reverence of someone holding something that might break. It made her angrier than any of the other versions would have. Because this was the version that worked on her. This was the version that made her want to reach down and put her hand over his. And she could not afford to want that right now. She could not afford to forget the roses. She could not afford to forget 17 days of looking over her shoulder on Vancouver buses while he already knew exactly where she was sitting. She stepped back. His hand fell. He rose without rushing it, straightened his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who had learned to reassemble himself quickly after moments of exposure. His face closed again, not entirely, but enough. The controlled Min-jae resettled over whatever she had just seen. You knew the whole time, Amara said again. She needed to stay with that. Keep it between them like a piece of evidence. 17 days. Yes. And you watched me. You let me think. She stopped, pressed her fingers against her collarbone. Her heart was doing the thing, the arrhythmic thing. She breathed through it. I found a doctor. A real doctor who knows my heart condition and knows this pregnancy, and I was building something. Stop saying that. Her voice cracked on it, just slightly. She hated it. Stop telling me you knew everything. That is not a comfort. That is not something you say to someone, like it's supposed to make them feel better about you. Min-jae said nothing, which was almost worse. He moved to the small bar cart near the window and poured water, not for himself, for her, and set the glass on the table near her without requiring her to take it. The gesture was so fluently attuned to what she needed that it enraged her further. Sit down, he said, not commanding, something closer to asking. Please, I'll stand. He didn't push it. He pulled out a chair for himself and sat, and now she was the one standing, and he was the one looking up at her, which rearranged the geometry of the room in a way she hadn't expected. Tell me what you need, he said. I needed you not to find me. That was never going to happen, because you had surveillance on my passport. Because I don't lose things that matter to me. He said it flat, not romantic, factual in a way that was somehow more disturbing than a threat. Amara, I have known you were pregnant for longer than you think. She went still. The vitamins, he said, 3 weeks before you left. I found them when I was looking for something else entirely. I wasn't searching for evidence. I wasn't suspicious. I opened the wrong cabinet. A pause. I put them back exactly as they were. The room felt smaller. You didn't say anything. No. Why? He considered this with the particular care he gave to things that actually mattered to him. Because I wanted to see what you would do. Whether you'd tell me. Whether you trusted me enough to tell me. He looked at the ultrasound photographs still sitting on the table between them. I waited too long. By the time I understood that you weren't going to tell me, that you were planning something else, you were already gone. Amara picked up the water glass, drank half of it, set it down. You let me run, she said. I let you go far enough to see where you'd go, what you'd build, whether you'd disappear completely or whether I'd be manageable, she said. Whether I'd be somewhere findable when you decided you wanted me back. He didn't deny it. That was the thing about Min-jae that she had never been able to dismiss. Even now, even in this room, with the roses still sitting downstairs and 17 days of careful ordinary life burning in her chest like an accusation. He didn't deny things. He didn't construct comfortable explanations. He let the ugliness of what he'd done sit in the open air, and he did not apologize for it. And somehow that was both infuriating and more honest than anything else she'd encountered in the past year. You used me, she said. I needed to know if I could trust you. Trust me. She laughed short, without warmth. I'm the one who's been living inside your surveillance system for 8 months. I'm the one who had to hide prenatal vitamins in a tampon box. And you needed to know if you could trust me. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. Something that hadn't had enough practice to be guilt, but was working in that direction. The pregnancy changes everything, he said. It changed everything for me 4 months ago, when I was alone in a bathroom, trying to figure out what my life was. She pulled the chair out across the table from him, and sat down, because her legs were tired and her heart was still doing the thing, and she refused to let her body betray her in front of him. It didn't change anything for you until 20 minutes ago. That's not, he stopped. Say it. Whatever you were going to say. It's not accurate, he said. But I understand why you see it that way. I don't want you to understand why I see it that way. I want you to understand that it is true. Silence. Outside, Vancouver's lights spread out below them, indifferent and enormous. Rain had started against the windows, the persistent West Coast kind that didn't commit to being dramatic, just wore you down. Min-jae looked at the ultrasound photograph for a long moment. What did the doctor say? He said quietly. Amara watched his face. 18 weeks. Measuring well. The valve issue is there, but it's not presenting as high risk yet. She wants to see me every 3 weeks. She doctor. Souza. She specializes in cardiac complications in pregnancy. She's the best option I found. A pause. Within a radius that I could actually reach without your people stopping me. He absorbed that. You researched her before you left. I researched her for 2 months before I left. I researched everything. She put her hands flat on the table. I didn't run because I was panicking. I ran because I spent 11 weeks building a plan, and it was the best plan available to me, which tells you something about the options I had. Min-jae looked at her hands on the table, at the steadiness of them. You're extraordinary, he said. Not flattery. Observation. The way he might note a structural quality in a building. I'm exhausted, she said. There's a difference. Dae-hyun knocked once and came in without waiting. Amara had known he was outside the door. She'd clocked the shadow under it when she arrived, but she still felt her shoulders tighten when he entered. Dae-hyun had an ability to occupy a room without contributing to it, a particular competence in making himself functionally invisible while being completely present. He was 43, lean with close-cropped hair, and the posture of a man who had spent decades being ready. He looked at Amara, then at Min-jae. Cho is downstairs, he said. Min-jae's eyes moved to him. Something brief and communicative passed between them, the shorthand of men who had worked together for 15 years. Tell him to wait, Min-jae said. He says the Busan matter needs. Tell him to wait. Dae-hyun's gaze moved back to Amara. She met it. She had never been able to read Dae-hyun clearly. He wasn't warm toward her, but he wasn't hostile. He served Min-jae with the totality of a man who had organized his entire identity around one loyalty. And within that organizing principle, she existed as a factor he monitored and accounted for, rather than a person he evaluated. At the transit station, the moment she'd seen him with the phone against his ear, she'd been terrified of him. Now, sitting across from Min-jae, with the ultrasound photograph on the table, she felt something different about Dae-hyun's presence. He had known, of course he had. He always knew. How many people know I'm here? She asked. Dae-hyun glanced at Min-jae. Answer her, Min-jae said. 3, Dae-hyun said. Myself, your driver, and the advance man who secured the floor. And Cho. A pause. Cho knows you were located. He doesn't know the details. Amara filed that away. Cho, who had put his face too close to hers in a restaurant 8 months ago, who had stood down because Min-jae told him to, which meant the dynamic between them was power rather than respect. Cho, who had since then treated her with the specific courtesies of a man who resented being corrected by someone he considered beneath him. I want to talk about the terms, she said. Both men looked at her. What terms, Min-jae said. The terms under which I'd be willing to come back. She kept her voice even. Because if you're going to make me come back, regardless of what I want, then we should both be honest about what this is. But if you actually want something different, if the version you want is the one where I'm not trying to escape every 17 days, then we have things to talk about. The room was quiet enough that she could hear Dae-hyun's breathing. Min-jae said, leave us. Dae-hyun left without a word. The argument started calmly, the way structural fires often start, at some small point of friction that looked manageable until it wasn't. Min-jae had apparently already thought about terms. This didn't surprise her. What surprised her was the specificity of what he offered, her own attorney, independent of his organization. Medical autonomy, all decisions regarding her pregnancy and her cardiac care made without his approval required. Private areas of whatever residence they shared, unmonitored by his security systems. A formal document legally binding to the extent that anything binding a man like Min-jae could be called truly legal. He laid it out in the measured cadence he used when presenting things he'd spent time on. Amara listened. Then she said, who drew up this arrangement? I have lawyers. She looked at him steadily. Your lawyers drew up terms that are meant to protect me from you. He paused. They're experienced. They work for you. They've worked for you for years. Their loyalty is to you. She leaned forward slightly. I need my own attorney. Someone who has never met you, never been in your building, never cashed a check that came from anything you touched. That level of separation is non-negotiable, she said. The word landed between them with enough weight that Min-jae stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her. You've never used that word with me before, he said. I've never had this much at stake before. He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she wondered if she'd pushed past some invisible line. His face gave her nothing. It was doing the closed thing, the controlled thing, and she had learned over 8 months how to read the gradations of it. This wasn't anger. This was recalculation. All right, he said. She blinked. She hadn't expected that so quickly. An independent attorney, he said. Your choice. Vetted by no one I employ. And the security monitorings. Adjusted. I need specifics. Not adjusted. I need to know which rooms, which devices, what gets reviewed and by whom. Amara, specifics, Min-jae. She kept his gaze. You've been watching me for 8 months without telling me. You knew about the pregnancy before I left, and you didn't tell me. You had 17 days of footage from my Vancouver apartment, and you didn't tell me. She stopped. Something tightened in her throat that she wouldn't let become anything audible. I cannot trust a general statement from you. I need specifics, or I need to know right now that there are no real terms. And this is just a different kind of being kept. The silence stretched. And then something happened to Min-jae's face that she had seen exactly once before. The night, early in her employment, when he had received news that a shipment had been seized and 3 of his men detained. He had gone to the window and stood with his back to the room for 2 full minutes before turning around and beginning to manage the problem. He stood now. He went to the window. She waited. The family wing, he said finally, without turning. Whatever space we designate as private bedroom, bathrooms, nursery. No cameras. No audio monitoring. Security at the perimeter of that wing only. He stopped. That's what I can give you. The rest of the estate stays as it is. I won't compromise the safety of the household. And my movements. He turned. What about them? I go to my medical appointments without an escort inside the building. Dae-hyun can drive me. Security can be outside. I see doctor. Souza alone is my condition. Her voice was flat. My heart, my pregnancy, my doctor. You can have someone in the parking lot. You cannot come through the door. He stared at her. She stared back. You understand, he said slowly, that every arrangement I'm making is designed to keep you safe. The monitoring, the security. I understand that you believe that. She stood up. She was done sitting while this was negotiated. I also understand that you watching me through cameras in my bedroom is not safety. It's surveillance. And I've been surveilled for 8 months, and I didn't even know it, and that is... She stopped, pressed her hand to her sternum. The heart was doing it again, and she needed a moment. That is not something I can live inside. Not with the child. Not with a daughter or a son who will grow up learning what safety looks like by watching what we model. Min-jae went very still. We don't know the sex yet, he said quietly. No, she said. We don't. Another silence. Different from the others. Less tactical. You thought about that, he said. Our child watching what we model. I think about it constantly. She sat back down. Not surrender exhaustion. That's why I left. Not because I stopped. She caught herself. Rerouted. I left because the version of myself that was becoming comfortable inside your arrangement was not someone I wanted my child to see. Someone who accepted invisible chains because the cage was nice enough. Min-jae sat down across from her. He looked at her for a long time without speaking. The rain had gotten heavier against the windows. The city below them did its indifferent blinking. I booked the ceremony for next week, he said. She felt her jaw tighten. What ceremony? Our wedding. The air in the room changed. She stopped. Started again. You brought me here to tell me I had 17 days of fake freedom, and you've already booked our wedding. It was always the logical step. Cancel it. Amara, cancel it tonight. She was not raising her voice. She had learned somewhere in the past 4 months that the quieter she was, the more he actually heard her, and she needed him to hear this. You cannot decide the details of my life and call the result a partnership. You cannot arrange my wedding as a response to finding out about my pregnancy and then sit across from me talking about terms and independent attorneys and privacy. It doesn't work that way. I want to protect what we're building. Then stop building it without me. She put both hands flat on the table again. Stop building it without me. Every single time you arrange something to keep me safe, without asking whether I want the arrangement, you are making the same mistake. You are making me a project, an asset, something you manage. Her voice finally caught at the edge, just slightly. I am going to be the mother of your child. I need you to understand the difference between those two things. Min-jae was very still. The controlled face had come apart again. Not dramatically, not in any way that someone who didn't know him well would catch. But she knew him well. She had spent 8 months learning every variation of his composure. Underneath the control, in the place she had seen only in the kitchen at 7 in the morning and in the library late at night, and now here, in this rain-soaked penthouse with a 16-week ultrasound photograph on the table between them, underneath all of it, Kang Min-jae was afraid. Not of losing control, not of the Busan matter or the seized shipments or whatever Cho was waiting downstairs to discuss. Afraid of losing this. Cancel the ceremony, she said again, quieter, and we'll talk about what comes next. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. She heard him say 3 words to whoever answered. Cancel it. Everything. He put the phone face down on the table. She exhaled. It was not relief exactly. It was the sensation of one door closing, an understanding that every door from here was going to require the same fight, that this man would spend the rest of his life moving in the direction of control because control was the only language he had ever been fluent in, and she was going to spend the rest of hers demanding translation. She wasn't sure yet whether that was a life she was choosing or simply the only remaining option. She wasn't sure Min-jae knew the difference either. Cho was waiting in the hallway when Dae-yoon let her out. She had not expected that. She had expected the elevator to be clear, the floor to be managed with the seamless discretion that characterized everything around Min-jae. Instead, there was Cho broad-shouldered, impatient, with the look of a man who had been waiting 40 minutes and had opinions about it. He looked at her the way he always looked at her. Not aggressive. Something more carefully calibrated than that. The particular attention of a man who was assessing something he didn't yet have information on. Miss Bennett, he said. Mr. Cho, you look well. For someone who's been traveling. She kept walking toward the elevator. He's going to be a few more minutes, Cho said to her back. If you want to wait. She pressed the button. I'll manage. That's always been your thing, hasn't it? His voice stayed pleasant. The pleasantness was the problem. Managing. Very capable. Very resourceful. A pause. For someone who came from nothing. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, turned around so she was facing him as the doors began to close. Good night, Mr. Cho, she said. His smile didn't move. Good night, Miss Bennett. The doors closed. She stood in the elevator and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. 1 count in, 2 out. The irregular heartbeat steadied itself by the time she reached the lobby. She had sensed the restaurant since that first night. That Cho was a problem. She had categorized him and filed him and focused on other more immediate problems. But standing in that hallway with Min-jae 20 feet away through a closed door, Cho's pleasantness had felt like a finger testing the tension of a wire. She didn't know yet what the wire connected to. She should have found out sooner. Min-jae's driver took her to a different hotel, not where she'd been living, but a property Min-jae owned on the west side of the city. A suite that had clearly been prepared in advance, which meant that 2 had been arranged before she arrived at the penthouse, before the negotiation, before the canceled wedding. She stood in the suite and looked at the prepared room, and understood that she was not free, and had not been free, and would not be free in any version of tomorrow that currently existed. But she had a canceled wedding, and an agreement about her doctor, and a concession about the private wing. She had moved him. Actually moved him. She sat on the edge of the bed and took out the burner phone, one she'd carried Ed from Seattle, the one he almost certainly knew about, and looked at Dr. Souza's number. She typed a message. Just 2 lines. I may need to reschedule. I'll confirm within 48 hours. I'm safe. She hit send. Then she lay back on the hotel bed with her hand on her stomach and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what she had just agreed to. She had not agreed to go back. She had not agreed to the marriage. She had agreed to negotiate, which was a different thing. A thing that required her to stay within reach, within the circle of his influence, which was exactly what he'd wanted. He hadn't retrieved her. She had walked into the penthouse herself. The thought settled over her like cold water. She had come when called. She had told herself it was strategy, that she'd had nowhere left to run, and negotiation was the only remaining tool. Both of those things were true. But underneath them was the harder truth she hadn't let herself look at directly since she stepped off the elevator and walked through that door. Some part of her had come because he asked her to. She pressed her palm against her own sternum, felt her heart irregular, imperfect, hers beating underneath. Downstairs in the hotel lobby, she did not know that Cho was making a phone call to a man in Seattle who was not on Min-jae's payroll. She did not know that the conversation lasted 11 minutes. She did not know what was traded during those 11 minutes, or what had been accumulating in Cho's particular accounting of grievances long before Amara arrived at the estate, long before she became a variable in a calculation that had been running for years. She did not know any of it. She lay in the hotel room and breathed and felt her child's presence. Not movement yet, not at 16 weeks, but something she had started recognizing as a kind of atmospheric weight, a there-ness that altered the quality of silence. She was not ready for what was coming. Nobody ever was. She slept 4 hours, not because she was calm, because her body had been running on adrenaline since Roses arrived, and it finally collected its debt. A sound like Greenwood pulling her under somewhere around 2 in the morning and releasing her at 6 when the light came through the curtains, at an angle that reminded her of nothing familiar. She lay still for a moment before she moved. That was a habit she'd built in the estate inventory first. Move second. Where are you? What's around you? What changed while you were unconscious? Hotel room, Vancouver. Min-jae's property. Burner phone on the nightstand. Ultrasound photograph on the desk. Where she'd put it before she fell asleep. She couldn't stand to have it in her bag, and she couldn't stand to hold it, and she needed it visible. Needed the reminder of why none of last night could be allowed to unhinge her. She sat up, put both feet on the floor. Her heart was steady. That happened sometimes after periods of extreme stress. Her body overcorrected into an unusual calm as though conserving resources. She didn't trust it. She picked up the burner phone. Dr. Souza had replied at 11:47 the previous night. Understood. I'm here. Please confirm when you can. 3 words at the end that Amara read twice. Take care, Amara. She pressed the phone against her sternum. Then she showered, changed into yesterday's clothes. She had nothing else here. Another detail Min-jae had arranged imperfectly, which told her the suite had been prepared quickly and under pressure, and sat at the desk and began making a list. She did this when situations became unmanageable. She had done it at 17 when her cardiac diagnosis arrived, and the costs of ongoing medication were more than her mother could carry. She had done it at 21 when she lost 2 jobs in 3 weeks, and the math of her survival stopped working. A list. What is true? What is controllable? What is not? What happens next? What was true? She was in Vancouver, in a hotel Min-jae owned, 17 weeks pregnant, with a heart condition, an informal set of verbal agreements, and no signed document. What was controllable? The attorney. She needed to move on that immediately, before anything else crystallized into arrangements she hadn't reviewed. What was not controllable? Cho's phone call, which she didn't know about yet. What happened next? She had 48 hours before she'd told Dr. Souza she would confirm. She was mid-list when the knock came. Not Dae-hyun's knock. She had catalogued that in the penthouse last night, precise and single. This was softer, 2 raps, the kind a hotel staff member would use. She opened the door. It was a woman she didn't recognize. Mid-30s, Korean-American, with the specific quality of stillness that Amara associated with people who worked adjacent to Min-jae's organization, people who had learned to be very good at revealing nothing. Mr. Kang sent some things, the woman said. She had a garment bag over one arm and a paper bag in the other hand. Kind of paper bag that came from a good grocery, not a hotel kitchen. Amara looked at the garment bag. He doesn't know my size, she said. He does, the woman said. Not unkindly. Matter of fact. Amara stepped back and let her in. She did not open the garment bag for 20 minutes. She ate the food, first fruit, yogurt, the specific kind of green tea she'd mentioned, once in passing to Min-jae 8 months ago, which he had apparently retained and communicated to someone who had sourced it in Vancouver at 7 in the morning. She ate methodically because her body needed it, and the baby needed it, and sentimentality about who had sent it was a thing she couldn't afford right now. Then she opened the garment bag. Clean clothes. Her size. Correct. Not the designer pieces he bought for the estate, simpler things. Practical. The kind of clothes she'd been buying for herself in Vancouver. He or someone he directed had paid attention to what she'd been wearing here rather than what she'd worn there. She put on the jeans, the sweater, looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like herself. The Vancouver version, not the estate version. She didn't know how to feel about the fact that he'd noticed the difference. Min-jae arrived at 10. He knocked and she let him in, and he stood in the hotel suite looking at her in the clothes he'd sent, and something in his face settled slightly, the way a calculation resolves when a variable confirms itself. You slept, he said. Some. How's your heart? Stable. He nodded. He had coffee 2 cups from somewhere outside the hotel, the kind of detail that meant he'd gone somewhere specifically rather than using the room service. He set hers on the desk, near her list. He didn't look at the list. I have something to tell you, he said. She looked at him over the coffee cup. Cho is no longer part of my organization. The coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. Since when? She said. Since last night. Approximately 2 hours after you left the penthouse. He sat in the chair across from her. He was wearing yesterday's suit. He hadn't slept either, or had slept somewhere other than where his luggage was. Dae-hyun found the call, the one Cho made from the lobby. What call? Min-jae looked at her steadily. Cho has been in contact with a man named Victor Shen for approximately 8 months. Shen runs a competing operation out of Vancouver, smaller than mine, significantly, but with interests in the same import lanes. Cho has been providing information, not major intelligence. Incremental things. Shipping schedules, contact names, procedural details. He paused. Last night, Cho told Shen that you were in Vancouver, that you were pregnant, that I was here personally. The room was very quiet. He's been doing this for 8 months, Amara said. Yes. Since around the time I arrived at the estate. Min-jae's jaw tightened fractionally. We don't know whether your arrival was connected to his decision to. Don't manage this, she said. Don't make it careful. Just tell me. He looked at her. Then, we don't know if Cho saw you as an opportunity or a liability. What we know is that for 8 months, a man who sat 12 feet from us at dinner knew things he shouldn't have known and gave them to someone who might use them against me. Another pause. Against us. Amara set down the coffee cup. 8 months. The same 8 months she had spent inside Min-jae's estate, learning his household, sleeping in his rooms, carrying his child. The same 8 months that someone at the table was selling edges of information to a competing operation. Clinic, she said, in Vancouver. Cho knew I was there. Yes, could Shen know? Min-jae was quiet for 1 second too long. Min-jae. We're working to determine the scope of what Cho shared. It's possible Shen has some information about your medical situation. We don't know how much. She stood up. She crossed to the window and stood there with her back to him and both hands pressed against the sill and looked at Vancouver below the streets. She'd walked for 17 days thinking she was free, thinking she'd built a perimeter of safety around herself and her child, thinking the ordinary rhythm of cafe work and bus routes and grocery runs was something she'd earned. Cho had known where she was. Cho had been reporting to someone with competing interests. For 8 months, she turned around. You need to tell me everything, she said. Not the managed version. Not what you've decided I need to know. Everything. It took 2 hours. Min-jae was not a man who explained things casually, and he was not a man who found disclosure comfortable, but he was, underneath everything, a man who understood strategic reality. The strategic reality was that Amara was now a variable in a situation that had extended well beyond his estate in Seattle. She needed to understand the dimensions of it. Victor Shen had started as a minor distribution operator in Vancouver 7 years ago. He had grown systematically by identifying weaknesses in larger organizations and pressing on them. He was not Min-jae's size, not in resources, not in reach, but he was patient and he was precise, and he had, for the past 8 months, been receiving a curated feed of intelligence from inside Min-jae's organization. Why Cho, Amara said. Cho believed he was being passed over, Min-jae said. He'd expected a particular expansion last year, a senior role in the Seoul operations. It went to someone else, someone you trusted more, someone who deserved it more. He said it without apology. Cho is capable, but he has a problem with variables he can't control, Like me. Like you. She absorbed that. He was going to use information about me to leverage something with Shen. That's one theory. The other is that he was positioning himself building a record of useful intelligence, so that when he eventually moved to Shen's operation, he'd arrive with enough value to negotiate a senior role there. Either way, my pregnancy is information that's now in the hands of someone who benefits from destabilizing you. Yes. What does Shen do with that? Min-jae looked at her without answering, which was its own kind of answer. She felt the cold move through her slowly. Not panic, she was past the age of panic, had burned through most of her panic capacity in the past 4 months. This was something colder and more deliberate. The recognition of actual danger, measured and specific. Pregnancy. A cardiac complication. A woman who had been living openly in Vancouver under a thin alias for 17 days, while a man with competing interests and now accurate information about her medical situation operated out of this same city. You have to move me, she said. I'm aware. Not back to Seattle. Not yet. She was thinking fast, the way she thought, when the math of a situation stopped working and she needed a new equation. If Shen knows about the clinic, the apartment is already exposed. If the apartment's exposed, Grace is potentially exposed, which means Grace Chen has been contacted, Min-jae said carefully. Amara stopped. What do you mean contacted this morning? 2 of my people spoke with her. She's being relocated temporarily. You relocated Grace. Her voice had gone flat in a way that scared her slightly because it was the voice she used when something was happening that she had no immediate response to. Without asking me. Without telling me first. There wasn't time to. She's a 60-year-old woman who runs a cafe and gave me a job without asking questions. And you sent people to her this morning and moved her, and you didn't think to mention that until now. She's safe. That is not the point. She was breathing through it. The heart was not doing the thing, which, she was furious and frightened, and her body was bizarrely steady. That is never going to be the point. Every time you make a decision that affects people connected to me and you don't tell me. I made a decision that kept her safe. You made a decision. She moved away from the window. You made a decision about a woman I care about, and you slotted it into your operation, and you're presenting it to me as a fact that's already done. Can you hear what that sounds like? He looked at her. It sounds like every other thing you've done for the past 8 months, she said. It sounds exactly like it. The protection is real, and the control is real, and you cannot tell the difference between them, and that is the problem. That has always been the problem. The room held the words. Min-jae said, What would you have had me do? Tell me first. Ask me. Give me 30 seconds of being a person who gets to know what's happening in her own life before it happens. She sat back down because her legs were tired and the baby was pressing on something that made standing uncomfortable. Where is she? A property I own in West Vancouver. She's comfortable. Her cat is with her. Despite everything, something in Amara's chest loosened slightly at the cat. She hated that it did. I want to talk to her. That can be arranged. Today, yes, she looked at him. He looked back. The negotiation had resumed. She could feel it. The constant triangulation of what could be conceded and what couldn't. The architecture of 2 people who were building something while simultaneously arguing about who held the blueprints. What's your plan for Shen? She said. That's not something you need to. It is now, she said, because my doctor's address is potentially in his hands. Because he knows I'm pregnant and knows where I've been living. Because the safety of my child is directly related to what happens between you and Victor Shen. She held his gaze. So yes, I need to know. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her. She was in the middle of processing Min-jae's plan for Shen aggressive containment, a meeting that had been in motion before he flew to Vancouver, a set of pressure points in Shen's operation that Min-jae's people had been quietly mapping for months when Dae-hyun knocked and came in. His face was the wrong configuration. She had learned Dae-hyun's face through 8 months of proximity. The operational face, the watchful face, the very rare and carefully minimized face he made when something had gone wrong. This was the last one. What? Min-jae said. Dae-hyun looked briefly at Amara. I should say it in front of her, Min-jae said. Pause. Then Cho didn't go to a hotel last night. Where did he go? He went to Shen. Room temperature dropped by no physical measure, but Amara felt it. He went directly to him, Min-jae said yes. We tracked the car. He arrived at Shen's office building at 11:40 and left at 2:15 in the morning. Dae-hyun's eyes moved briefly to Amara again. He wasn't just reporting information. He was negotiating a position. He defected, Amara said. Yes, Dae-hyun said. The math of this rearranged itself rapidly in her head. Cho had not simply been a leak, a passive conduit of information. Cho had been actively building a transition. He had spent 8 months compiling intelligence, and last night, the moment he understood that Min-jae had discovered his calls, he had taken everything he'd accumulated and delivered it in person. What does Shen have now, she said. Her voice was very controlled. Dae-hyun looked at Min-jae. Tell her, Min-jae said. Based on the time frame and what Cho would have had access to the clinic's address. The name of your doctor, the alias you were using here. Dae-hyun stopped, and the general status of your pregnancy. She pressed her hand against her stomach without meaning to. My cardiac information, she said. Did Cho have that? Dae-hyun hesitated. He had access to your employment file, which included the medical disclosure you signed when you began working at the estate. She had signed that. A standard document, she'd thought. Health insurance coordination. It had said at the top. She had signed it. She had given them her cardiac history in a document she'd skimmed on her second day working at a household that turned out to be something other than what it was presented as. And she had been so desperate for the job that she had not read the fine print carefully enough. She pressed both hands against her thighs. The anger was enormous. And layered at Min-jae, at herself, at the specific cruelty of a situation where her own need had become a liability, where the information she'd disclosed in good faith was now sitting in the hands of a man who had reason to want Min-jae destabilized and might have very specific ideas about how a vulnerable pregnancy could be useful. He won't touch her, Min-jae said. He said it to Dae-hyun, but it was for her. If Shen makes a move against my family, he doesn't survive the week. That's not reassuring, Amara said. It's the truth. The truth is that a man I've never met has my doctor's address and my medical history, and you're telling me the reassuring part is that you'll punish him after something happens. She stood up. I need to call Dr. Souza. Amara, now Min-jae. Right now. She picked up the burner phone. I need to warn her. She's been treating me in good faith, and she doesn't know she's potentially been placed in. My people are already on their way to her clinic. She stopped. Looked at him. I called Dae-hyun 20 minutes before he came in here, Min-jae said. The moment I understood the full scope of what Cho had access to. He held her gaze. I am telling you about it now, because I promised you I would tell you things. I acted first because there was no time. There was not. She stood with the phone in her hand. This was the impossible geometry of him. He had acted correctly, probably in terms of protecting Dr. Souza without telling her, which was the pattern she had been fighting since Vancouver, since Seattle, since the moment she understood what she'd walked into. But this time, the action was necessary, and the timing was genuinely impossible, and she could not pretend otherwise without lying to herself. She called Dr. Souza anyway. The doctor answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, a woman who had been running a medical practice for 2 decades and had developed the composure to match it. Amara, she said. I've had some visitors, I'm sorry, Amara said. I'm so sorry. I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know my situation would reach you. I know you didn't, the steadiness in Dr. Souza's voice was different from Min-jae's steadiness, warmer, more human in its texture. Are you all right? How's your heart? Stable. The baby, I don't know if anything. Your health information doesn't change your treatment. I'm still your doctor. That's not movable. A pause. The gentlemen who came to my office were professional, and I have agreed to a temporary security arrangement for the clinic. I want you to understand that my concern right now is for you, not for the logistics. Amara's throat tightened. She turned away from Min-jae and Dae-hyun and stood facing the window. I'll confirm the next appointment as soon as I can, she said. Whenever you're ready. I'll be here. She ended the call. She stood at the window for a moment with her back to the room. Then she turned. I need an attorney, she said. Today. Whatever it takes to find someone in this city who has never worked with you or anyone connected to you. I need that today. Not tomorrow. Min-jae looked at her. Something in his expression had shifted again. The particular quality it got when he was reassessing, recalibrating, processing a version of events that was different from what he'd anticipated. I can reach out through... I'll find one myself, she said. Daehyun will drive me. You'll stay here. Daehyun's eyes went to Min-jae. Min-jae, after a pause that lasted exactly long enough for Amara to understand that she had asked for something that required actual concession. Fine. She put the burner phone in her pocket, picked up her bag, looked at Min-jae across the room. I'm not running, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm going to find an attorney, and I'm coming back and we're going to continue this. But I need to do this part without you. He nodded once. She left. The attorney's name was Margaret Yoon, and she operated out of a 3-room office on the 8th floor of an unremarkable building in East Vancouver. She had been recommended by Dr. Souza, quietly, in the brief call, as the name of someone she should look for if she needed help that had no connection to the situation she was in. Dr. Souza had been holding that name like a small, careful reserve. Amara sat across from Margaret Yuan and told her as much as she needed to. Not everything. Not the full architecture of Min-jae's operation. Enough. Enough for Margaret to understand the nature of the agreements being discussed, the power imbalance, the pregnancy, the cardiac condition, the need for documentation that could not be altered by anyone with access to Min-jae's legal resources. Margaret Yoon listened without interrupting. She was 61, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a yellow legal pad that she wrote on in a small, precise hand. When Amara finished, Margaret said, I'll need 3 days to draft something comprehensive. I may not have 3 days. Then I'll need 48 hours, and you'll need to accept that some provisions will require revision when we have more time. A pause. Are you safe right now? Amara considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I'm safer than I was this morning, she said. I don't know if that's the same as safe. Margaret made a note. Come back tonight, she said. I'll have a preliminary framework. Bring me any documentation you already have, anything signed or proposed. Amara had nothing signed. She told her. That Margaret's expression said what it said. Then we start from scratch, the older woman said, which is fine. It's actually cleaner. She was in the elevator going down when her phone, the burner, buzzed. Not Min-jae's number. She'd saved his to the burner 3 nights ago. In a moment of pragmatism she hadn't examined too carefully. An unknown number. She let it ring. It rang 4 times and stopped. Then a text arrived. I know what he hasn't told you yet. Meet me, I'll explain. She stared at it. See Cho. She stood in the elevator as the doors opened on the ground floor. The lobby of the building was quiet. A reception desk. A few chairs, a wall of mailboxes. Daehyun was outside with the car. She read the message again. I know what he hasn't told you yet. She should show this to Min-jae immediately. That was the correct strategic move. That was what trust looked like in this particular arrangement, if they were building trust, if that was what this was. She looked at the message. She thought about 17 days of believing herself free while Min-jae watched. She thought about Grace Chen being relocated without her knowledge. She thought about Dr. Souza's clinic being surrounded by security she hadn't been told about. She thought about the medical disclosure form she had signed without reading. I know what he hasn't told you yet. Cho was compromised. Cho had defected. Cho was now operating from inside a rival's organization and had every reason to lie to her, manipulate her, use her as a pressure point against Min-jae. She knew all of that. She stood in the lobby with the phone in her hand and looked at the message. The problem was not that she trusted Cho. The problem was that she did not trust that Min-jae had told her everything. Those were 2 different problems. And standing in that lobby, 17 weeks pregnant, with her heart doing the irregular thing that meant her body was recognizing danger before her mind had finished processing it, Amara understood that the next decision she made would determine which version of this story she was in, the one where she was a woman who fought for herself on terms she chose, or the one where she simply traded one form of dependency for another and called it survival. She looked at the message one more time. Then she looked up through the glass lobby doors at Dae-hun standing beside the car, hands at his sides, loyal and watchful and completely Min-jae's. And she did the thing that no version of her previous self would have predicted. She typed back, where Cho's reply came in 40 seconds. Coffee shop. Granville and 7th. 1 hour. Come alone or don't come. She stood in the lobby and looked at the message and understood with complete clarity that this was either the worst decision she would make in a situation already full of bad decisions, or the one that finally gave her information that belonged to her? She took a breath. Then she walked to the glass doors and pushed through them into the cold Vancouver air. Dae-hyun straightened when he saw her. "I need to make a stop," she said, "before we go back." "Where?" "A pharmacy. I need prenatal vitamins, the ones I had at the apartment." They were a specific brand. She said it without hesitation, without the slight upward inflection that turned statements into questions. She had learned to lie convincingly somewhere in the past 4 months, and she was not proud of it, and she was going to use it now. Dae-hyun looked at her. His face did its unreadable thing. "I'll find parking," he said. The pharmacy was 3 blocks from the coffee shop. She spent 4 minutes inside, bought the vitamins, then told Dae-hyun she was going to walk the next block to a bakery that Grace had mentioned once, a specific place that sold a specific thing she was craving. She said it with the mild, slightly apologetic tone of a pregnant woman making an irrational food request, which was a register she had discovered made people surprisingly accommodating. Dae-hyun said he would bring the car around. She walked 1 block north, turned east, and covered the remaining 2 blocks at a pace that was brisk without being urgent. Her heart was steady, her hands were cold. The morning fog had burned off, and Vancouver was doing the thing it occasionally did, offering a sky so clean and blue it felt like an accusation. She walked into the coffee shop at Granville and 7th at exactly the 1-hour mark. Cho was in the back corner. He looked nothing like the man from the penthouse hallway. The polished surface was gone. He was wearing a jacket she didn't recognize, slightly too large, and there was something around his eyes that registered as sleeplessness, or fear, or both. He had a coffee in front of him that he hadn't touched. When he saw her come through the door, he didn't move, just tracked her across the room, with eyes that were doing constant peripheral work, checking the other tables, the entrance, the street outside. She sat down across from him. She did not take off her coat. "You have 10 minutes, she said. "Say what you need to say." Cho looked at her. The pleasantness from the hallway was completely gone. Without it, he looked older, more tired, more like a man who had made a serious miscalculation and was now running the math on whether he could survive it. "Min-jae hasn't told you about the Busan negotiation," he said. "What about it? What it involves? What he gave up to close it?" Cho put both hands flat on the table. She noticed they were not entirely steady. 4 months ago, right around when you were 3 or 4 weeks pregnant, when he first suspected Min-jae opened negotiations with the Busan Consortium. They control the Eastern Pacific import routes. He's been trying to consolidate that access for 3 years. "I know about the shipping interests. You know the surface." Cho leaned forward slightly. "The Busan's consortium has one condition for the partnership. They want blood removed from the Seattle operation. Specifically, they want the part of Min-jae's business that is," he paused, chose the word, "problematic. They're older money. They want legitimate infrastructure with clean documentation. A sound like green wood splitting. They want to be able to look at their partner and not see anything that could blow back on them from law enforcement." "He's been restructuring," she said. "I knew that. He's been telling you he's restructuring." Cho's eyes didn't move from her face. "What he's actually done is transfer the operational elements he's removing to a holding structure. Not dissolved, not shut down, transferred. To Shen." The coffee shop was warm and she was cold. "That's not possible," she said. "Shen is not a competitor," Cho said. "Shen is a subsidiary. Shen has been working for Min-jae for 4 years, through a series of intermediary structures that don't appear in any document with Min-jae's name on it. The competing operations, the rival territory. That's a construction. That's what they wanted you to see." He stopped. "That's what they wanted me to see for 8 months until I started finding the actual accounts." She sat very still. "Cho," she said carefully, "you defected to Shen last night." "I defected to a man who doesn't exist independently of Kang Min-jae." He said it with the specific bitterness of someone who has discovered they've played a role in a performance they didn't know they were part of. "I walked into Min-jae's other hand." She pressed her back against the chair. Her mind was moving faster than she wanted it to, because the conclusions it was reaching were things she needed more evidence for before she could believe them. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because Shen Min-jae, the structure, whatever you want to call it, knows your medical history, the cardiac information. Not because Cho the defector handed it over, because it was always going to Min-jae's people, regardless of which door it went through." He looked at her steadily. There's no Victor Shen who is separate from Min-jae, which means the threat to you and your child from an external competitor is not external, she said. No. The implications of this were so large that she could only take them in one layer at a time. She sat with it, the Busan negotiation as cover for a restructuring that wasn't a restructuring, Shen as a subsidiary rather than a rival. The 11-minute phone call in the lobby Cho, not defecting to a competitor, but walking unwittingly into a controlled entity, which meant the story of his defection had been fed to her as part of a larger narrative about external threat, about danger that required Min-jae's protection. Why would he manufacture the threat, she said, thinking aloud rather than asking. I was already back. I'd come to the penthouse. We were already negotiating. Were you negotiating from strength or from fear? She looked at Cho. Think about the difference, said. You came to that penthouse, and you pushed back on the attorney, the monitoring, the wedding. You were negotiating from a position of someone who was angry but who had options. Then Shen appeared, and Grace Chen was relocated, and your doctor's clinic was surrounded, and suddenly every option you had was in Min-jae's hands for safekeeping. He paused. How did the negotiation feel after that? The cold moved through her in a wave. She thought about the morning, about how the scope of what she was managing had expanded overnight from a personal confrontation with Min-jae to something that felt systemic, threatening, beyond her ability to navigate alone. About how Min-jae's protection had started feeling necessary in a way it hadn't felt the night before. She thought about Grace Chen in a property Min-jae owned in West Vancouver, with her cat. I need to verify this, she said. I know. What you're describing could be, you have reasons to lie to me. You have reasons to destabilize my negotiations with Min-jae. Yes, Cho said, I know that too, which is why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to ask him directly. He reached into his jacket and set a folded document on the table. This is the incorporation record for Shen Pacific Holdings, dated 4 years ago. The beneficial owner structure is in Appendix C. Min-jae's name doesn't appear. His mother's maiden name does. In a holding company that holds a holding company. She looked at the document without touching it. His mother's maiden name, she said. He uses it for structures he wants clean distance from. I found 3 others in the past 8 months. Cho's voice was flat, tired, stripped of everything performative. I'm not a good man. I was selling information for my own reasons, and I know what I did. But I'm sitting here telling you this because I walked into a room last night thinking I was changing sides and found out there are no sides. There's Min-jae, and there's everything Min-jae controls. And you are inside that structure now, whether you want to be or not, and you deserve to know the dimensions of it. He stood. He'll know you met with me, he said. Dae-hyun will figure out the pharmacy was a misdirection. Maybe he already has. He buttoned his jacket. The document's yours. Do what you want with it. He left. She sat at the table and looked at the folded document for a moment. Then she picked it up and put it in her bag. She walked out of the coffee shop into the cold blue morning and stood on the sidewalk and took in air in careful measured amounts because her heart was doing the thing and she needed it to stop. It didn't stop. She pressed her hand against her sternum and breathed 1, 2, 4, 6 until the rhythm evened out. Dae-hyun was parked at the corner. He saw her the moment she came out. She watched him clock her location, her expression, the direction she'd come from. He was on his phone before she reached the car. She got in. Neither of them spoke for a full city block. Then Dae-hyun said, without looking at her, Mr. Kang would like to see you. I know, she said. Min-jae was standing when she came in, not at the window this time, in the center of the room, like a man who had decided that the window was a posture he couldn't afford, right now. He looked at her face, and something in him went very still. You met with Cho, he said. Yes. Dae-hyun. Dae-hyun did exactly what he was supposed to do. I lied to him. That's on me. She set her bag down on the desk, reached in, took out the folded document, and set it on the table between them. Tell me about Shen Pacific Holdings. The room did something. Not a sound absence of sound. A quality of stillness that she felt in her back teeth. Min-jae looked at the document. He did not pick it up. Where did Cho— Tell me, she said. Not loudly. With the quietness that worked. Not the explanation you've been building since Dae-hyun called you. The actual answer. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down. she remained standing. Shen Pacific is a holding structure, he said. It exists within a network of entities that are connected to my organization through several intermediary layers. Victor Shen is a real person. He manages the Vancouver operation. He reports through those layers, ultimately to me. So there's no rival, she said. There is friction. The operations are run separately, with genuine independence day to day. But the ultimate structure is you? She looked at him. There is no external threat from Victor Shen. You manufactured the threat. I did not manufacture it. His voice sharpened slightly. The situation with Cho was real. The information he handed over was real. The concern for your doctor and Grace Chen was real. The concern was real. The source of the danger was you. She pressed her hands against the desk. Cho walked into your other hand. He thought he was defecting, and he just moved rooms inside your building. And you used that. You used the story of a rival threat to change the texture of our negotiation. To make me feel like I needed you in a way I didn't feel the night before. He looked at her steadily. You needed protections. From you, she said. The protection was from you. You are the only entity in this situation with real leverage over my life, and you built a shadow to make it look like the danger was coming from somewhere else. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and she hated it. She pushed through it. How long have you been running that structure? 4 years, and the Busan negotiation. Is that real? Yes. The terms require a visible separation from certain operations. Shen Pacific provides that visible separation. So you're not actually restructuring. You're cleaning the optics. A pause, he said. The Busan terms require genuine reduction in certain activities. The restructuring is real. The structure of how it's being implemented is more complex than I described to you. More complex. She laughed short without any warmth. You told me you were building something different. You sat in this room and let me believe that the danger from Shen was a reason to trust your protection. And the whole time, I was protecting you, he stood. Not aggressively. The movement of a man who needed to be vertical for what he was about to say. Everything I did in the past 24 hours was oriented toward your safety and our child's safety. The specifics of the corporate structure do not change that. They change everything, she said. They change what I know and what I don't know. They change whether I can trust any information you give me. They change, she stopped, pressed her fingers against the bridge of her nose. They change whether Margaret Yuan can write an agreement that means anything, because if every entity in this situation is ultimately connected to you, then the idea of independent protection for me is minus. She didn't finish the sentence, because she was doing the math as she said it, and the math was arriving at a number she hadn't expected, and the number was, she had less ground than she'd thought. Min-jae watched her face work through it. Amara, he said. Don't. She held up one hand. Give me a minute. He gave her the minute. She stood at the desk with one hand on its surface and did what she always did when the math stopped working. She stripped the problem back. What was true? What was controllable? What was not? What was true? The corporate structures didn't change the physical reality of her situation. She was 17 weeks pregnant. She had a cardiac condition. She was in a city where Min-jae controlled more than she had understood. Cho was an unreliable source with his own agenda. The document was real. She'd seen the structure, but Cho's interpretation of what it meant could still be shaped by his own interests. What was also true, Min-jae had withheld significant information. Deliberately. Not out of negligence, but as a strategic choice. And the strategic choice had shaped her sense of her own options. What was controllable, she was still standing. She had Margaret Yuan's card in her pocket. She had not agreed to anything signed. What was not controllable, the fact that she was in love with him. She had not let herself say that word in 4 months. Not since the bathroom floor in January, when she was doing a different kind of math. She said it now inside her own head, and it sat there like something drop solid, inconvenient, impossible to pretend wasn't on the floor. She loved Min-jae with the precise, complicated love of someone who had watched a person be extraordinary and terrible in equal measure, and had not been able to stop caring about either. That fact did not change what he'd done, but it changed the texture of what came next. She looked up at him. You have to stop doing that, she said. Her voice was different now. Not the controlled negotiating voice. Something rawer beneath it. You have to stop building the world around me and presenting me the version you want me to see. Not because it's strategically bad, though it is. Because I will always find out. I have found out every single time. But because every time you do it, I have to decide all over again whether I can trust anything. He looked at her. And I'm tired, she said. I'm so tired of doing that. 17 weeks pregnant, and I'm tired, and I cannot spend the rest of my life auditing everything you tell me. Then don't, he said. That is not, I'll stop. He said it simply, without the negotiating cadence. I'll stop building the version I want you to see. I'll stop making strategic decisions about what you need to know. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. I don't know if I'm capable of it. I've been operating this way for 20 years, and I don't know if I can simply turn it off. But I will try, specifically, deliberately, with you. She stared at him. That's the first time you've said, I don't know if I'm capable of anything, she said. I'm aware. She sat down. They sat across from each other in the quiet Vancouver room, and neither of them spoke for a long moment. Her heart had steadied. The baby was doing something. Not movement exactly, but presence, that atmospheric weight she'd been learning to recognize. The Shen structure, she said, finally. If Margaret Yoon drafts an agreement, it needs to account for the full network, not just the entities with your name on them. That will require significant disclosure. I know. He was quiet. To your attorney, he said slowly. A woman you chose today. About the full scope. Yes. Amara, the legal exposure that creates.
I know what it creates.
She met his eyes. And I know, and I'm asking you to do it anyway. Because if the protection is real, it needs to be real, across the actual structure. Not just the clean surface. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, all right. The call came at 4:47 in the afternoon. She was in the hotel suite, and Min-jae was in the adjoining room, with Dae-hyun when her burner phone rang. Not a text, a call, the unknown number from before. She answered it. Miss Bennett. The voice was male, unhurried, with an accent she couldn't immediately place. Something with a Pacific edge to it, slightly flattened vowels. My name is Victor Shen. I think it's time we spoke directly. She went to the connecting door and pushed it open. Min-jae looked up from the papers on his desk. She mouthed, Shen, calling me directly. His face changed. She held the phone out slightly so he could hear. I'm listening, she said into it. I appreciate that. A pause, the deliberate kind, the kind that was itself a demonstration of composure. I want you to understand that my conversation with Mr. Cho last night was informative for me in ways I suspect Mr. Kang hasn't fully represented. I'm not his subsidiary. Whatever he's told you about the structure, that story serves his interests. My interests and his have been misaligned for some time. Min-jae was on his feet now. He held out his hand for the phone. She shook her head. He stopped. What do you want, Mr. Shen, she said, to offer you something you haven't been offered. Genuine independence. Not monitored, not structured by someone else's legal team, not contingent on staying inside a system that belongs to Min-jae. Another pause. I know about your cardiac condition. I know about the pregnancy. I know you were in Vancouver building a life you believed in before the roses arrived. I can help you build that again. With real protection this time. Without the architecture. She watched Min-jae's face while Shen talked. She had spent 4 months learning to read him, and she read him now, the controlled surface, and underneath it something she rarely saw, fear operating at full capacity. Not the manageable fear she'd seen in the penthouse when he knelt and touched her stomach. Something older and less examined. The fear of a man who had just understood that his longest con and his most important relationship had collided in a room he didn't control. I need to know something, she said into the phone. The incorporation record Cho gave me. Shen Pacific Holdings 4 years ago. Beneficial owner structure in Appendix C. Is that document accurate? A beat. Partially, Shen said. What part is inaccurate? The part where it implies I operate under Min-jae's direction. The holding structure existed. The relationship did not persist in the form those documents suggest. He paused. We had an arrangement. It ended 18 months ago. Min-jae has been presenting it as current because it suits the story he needs for the Busan Consortium. She looked at Min-jae. Min-jae's jaw was tight. He said nothing. Is that true, she said. Not into the phone. Min-jae said, the formal arrangement ended. There are still operational overlaps. Is what he said true, she said. Pause in its broad outline, he said. Quiet. Controlled. Yes. She put the phone back to her ear. Mr. Shen, I'm going to call you back within the hour. She hung up. The argument that followed was the worst one yet. Not because of volume, neither of them raised their voices significantly, which had the paradoxical effect of making everything land harder. Quiet fights were Min-jae's native environment, and she had learned to match him, and the silence around each exchange gave every word full weight. The arrangement ended 18 months ago, she said, which is 4 months before I arrived at the estate. Yes. And you have been allowing the Busan Consortium to believe the separation structure is current and operative. The restructuring process is ongoing. Min-jae, she stopped him with the word alone. I am not the Busan Consortium. I am not your legal team. I am not someone you manage. She waited until she was sure he was actually listening rather than formulating. Was the separation real or was it documentation? He looked at her for a long moment. Documentation, he said. Primarily. So you haven't restructured. I have begun. You haven't restructured. She wasn't angry. She was past anger into something colder. And you sat across from me and told me you were dismantling the dangerous elements of your operation. You described a transformation. You let me believe that the man she stopped. Rerouted. You let me believe that what you'd offered me was real. A different version of what we had. What I offered you is real, he said. The intention is real. Intentions aren't documents. I know that. Intentions are not protection for my child. She stood up. She was done sitting. I need your operations to actually change. Not on paper. Not in a restructuring memo. Actually change. Because I am going to go back with you. I have decided that, but I will not go back to a version of your life that is identical to what it was, except that I now know more about it. He stared at her. You've decided, he said. Yeah. When? About 20 minutes ago. She crossed her arms. Not defensively, she was cold again. I'm not going back because you've given me everything I asked for. I'm not going back because the negotiation reached a satisfying conclusion. I'm going back because it is the best available option for my child, and because she stopped again. Something in her chest, doing the thing that wasn't the heart, the other thing. Because I know the difference between who you are and who you have decided to be. And those are not the same person yet. And I am going to hold you accountable to the gap between them for as long as it takes. Min-jae looked at her. Something happened to his face. Not the controlled surface reassembling itself. Something beneath that. Something she had seen only in fragments before. In the kitchen at 7 in the morning, in the library late at night, in this room when he knelt on the penthouse floor. Person underneath the architecture. You have calculated all of this, he said. Not accusatory, something closer to awe, and not entirely comfortable with it. I calculate everything, she said. It's how I've survived, including whether you... He stopped. Say it. He looked at her steadily. Including whether you care about me. The room was quiet. She looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. Including that, he absorbed it. She watched him absorb it. The way information that matters differently from operational intelligence registers in a person, how it travels through them more slowly. Amara, he said. I'm not finished. She uncrossed her arms, put her hands flat at her sides. I'm going to call Victor Shen back, and I'm going to tell him I don't need what he's offering. Not because I trust you completely. I don't, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but because his offer is designed to make me a pawn in something I understand even less than I understand you. And I have spent 4 months refusing to be someone's pawn. She picked up the burner phone. Then I'm going to meet with Margaret Yoon tonight, and I'm going to tell her the full corporate picture, and she's going to draft something that covers the actual scope. And you're going to sit with your people and figure out what real restructuring looks like. Not documentation, not Busan Consortium optics, actual operational change. Because our child deserves a father who is not one wire tap away from prison. She stopped, looked at him, and then we're going to go home, she said, together. And we're going to start whatever comes next. Min-jae stood in the center of the room and looked at this woman who had escaped his estate and built a life in another country and negotiated with him in a penthouse and met with his defected lieutenant behind his security details back and just calmly laid out the terms of his future with the quiet authority of someone who had done the math and was presenting her findings. He said, I need to tell you one more thing. Her hand tightened on the phone. Say it, she said. The call Shen made to you, he said. I knew he had your number. I knew it was possible he'd make contact. I didn't prevent it. The silence was absolute. Why, she said. Because I wanted to see what you'd do, he said. She stared at him. You are doing it again, she said very quietly. I know, and he said it in a way that meant he actually knew, not as a strategy, not as a managed concession, but as a man watching himself make the same mistake with full awareness and not yet knowing how to stop. I know I am. And I'm telling you instead of letting you find out. I recognize that's not sufficient, but it's different from before. She looked at him for a long time. It's marginally different from before, she said. That is not a high bar. No, he said, it isn't. She looked at the phone in her hand, at the unknown number in the call log, at the folded incorporation document in her bag, and the business card from Margaret Yoon in her pocket, and the ultrasound photograph still on the desk where she'd left it this morning, curved spine, and the thumbnail fingers, and the heart that was not hers. She dialed Shen's number. He answered on the first ring. Thank you for the offer, she said. I'm declining. Pause. Miss Bennett, I've made my decision, she said. I'd appreciate it if you didn't contact me again. She hung up. She stood in the room with Min-jae, and the cold light coming through the windows and the city below them doing its indifferent, ordinary business, and she understood that she was standing at the exact point where the story she'd been in, the one about escape, about building distance, about finding some geography where she could exist on her own terms, had ended. What came next was a different story, one she didn't have the full outline of yet, one where she was not running and not hiding and not waiting to be found, but standing in the room deliberately, eyes open, with full knowledge of who this man was and what he had done and what the gap was between the person he had been and the person she was going to require him to become. It was not a comfortable place to stand. It was hers. She put the burner phone in her bag. She picked up the ultrasound photograph from the desk. She looked at it, the curved fingers, the pearl string spine, the stuttering rhythmic flutter that was her child's heart, and she thought, you are the reason. None of the easy options were ever options at all. She put the photograph carefully in her bag, next to the phone. Then she looked at Min-jae and said, call your attorneys. Tell them they need to be available tomorrow for a full disclosure conversation with Margaret Yoon. All of it. Every entity. Every holding structure. Every layer. He looked at her for a moment. If I do that, he said carefully, there are risks I cannot fully. Call them, she said. And Kang Min-jae, who had not taken an order from another person in 15 years, who had built an empire on the premise that he was the last point of authority in every room he entered, picked up his phone. She watched him dial. She did not look away. She was still watching when he said, to whoever answered, clear tomorrow's schedule. All of it. Outside, Vancouver continued its ordinary business. Somewhere across the city, in a West Vancouver property, Grace Chen was drinking tea with her cat and waiting. Somewhere near the university, Dr. Souza was in her clinic with new security at the perimeter and a patient she hadn't stopped thinking about. Somewhere Cho was sitting in a room that belonged to Min-jae, whether he knew it or not, running out of moves. And in this room, Amara Bennett stood with her hand against her stomach and her bag on her shoulder, and her heart irregular, imperfect, finally hers beating steadily in her chest. She was not free yet, but she was no longer anyone's calculation, and that for tonight was enough to build on. Margaret Yuen's office at 9 in the morning looked different from the previous afternoon. The yellow legal pad had been replaced by 3 of them, fanned across the desk in a way that suggested she had been here since early, possibly since before the city woke up. She had coffee in a mug that said nothing on it, plain white, chipped at the rim, and reading glasses on her face instead of pushed up on her head. She looked at Amara when she came in, then at Min-jae behind her, then at the 2 attorneys Min-jae had brought, both of whom she assessed in approximately 4 seconds with the particular economy of a woman who had been reading rooms for 40 years. Sit, she said to everyone. They sat. What followed was not a negotiation in any sense that Min-jae had previously experienced. He had negotiated across boardroom tables in 3 countries with men who had the particular polished aggression of people accustomed to getting what they wanted through patience and selective disclosure. Margaret Yuen was not that. She was systematic in the way of someone who believed that truth had a structure and that the job simply to find it, and she moved through the corporate disclosure with a methodical patience that left no room for managed versions of events. She asked about Shen Pacific Holdings first. Min-jae's senior attorney, a man named Holt, who had been with his organization for 11 years and who clearly found this situation professionally excruciating, began a careful explanation of the intermediary structure. Margaret stopped him inside 40 seconds. "I'm going to ask Mr. Kang directly," she said, "and I'd like him to answer directly. You can review the accuracy afterward." Holt looked at Min-jae. Min-jae said, "Ask." What happened over the next 3 hours was the most uncomfortable experience of Min-jae's adult life, which was a list that included a detention by South Korean authorities at 26, a hostile takeover attempt at 31, and the night 4 years ago when a shipment went wrong and 2 men he was responsible for didn't come back. Margaret Yoon dismantled the architecture, not aggressively. She didn't raise her voice or perform outrage or make speeches. She asked questions in sequence, followed the answers to their logical conclusions, and when those conclusions revealed something that hadn't been disclosed, she noted it on her yellow legal pad and moved to the next question. By the end of the first hour, the full scope of the holding structure was on paper, in Margaret's handwriting. Every entity, every intermediary, every layer between Min-jae's name and the operational elements he'd been representing as separate. Amara sat beside her and said almost nothing. She didn't need to. She had asked for this, and it was happening, and her job now was to let it happen without managing it, to sit with the discomfort of watching things she cared about be examined by someone with no stake in making them look better than they were. At one point, Holt said carefully to Margaret, "I want to note that some of this disclosure creates legal exposure that—" "I'm Miss Bennett's attorney," Margaret said, without looking up from her pad. Her interests and Mr. Kang's interests are not identical. "I'm aware that this creates complexity." Holt said nothing after that. By noon, Margaret had a complete picture. She set down her pen, took off her reading glasses, looked at Min-jae across the desk. "The document I draft will cover the actual scope," she said, "not the presented scope. Every entity in this network that could conceivably affect Miss Bennett's autonomy, medical access, parental rights, or financial security needs to be addressed." She paused. "This is going to take longer than 48 hours. "How long?" Min-jae said. 2 weeks for something comprehensive. 1 week for something that covers the critical protections immediately, with addenda to follow." She looked at Amara. "What's your timeline?" "My next appointment with Dr. Souza is in 10 days, Amara said. "Then I'll have the critical provisions in 7. Margaret extended her hand to Amara, not to Min-jae. "I'll be in touch tomorrow with a preliminary framework." Amara shook it. They left. In the elevator going down, Min-jae stood beside her and said nothing for 3 floors. "Then she's exceptional." "I know," Amara said. "Where did you find her?" "Dr. Souza." He absorbed this. The elevator opened, and they walked out into the lobby, and through the glass doors into the cold morning, and she was aware of him beside her in the particular way. She'd been aware of him since that first kitchen morning, as a specific weight in the atmosphere, a presence that altered the quality of the air around it. "You gave her everything," she said. "Yes." Holt looked like he was going to be sick. "Holt will recover." A pause. "He's been protecting the wrong things." She looked at him sideways. "Is that what you think now?" He looked back at her. "It's what I've been thinking for longer than I've admitted." They stayed in Vancouver 4 more days. Not because the immediate situation required it. Min-jae's business in Seattle was accumulating in his absence in the way of a machine that has been left running without supervision. But Amara needed to close things properly. And Min-jae, for perhaps the first time in 15 years, had decided that following someone else's timeline was the correct strategic choice. She went to see Grace Chen on the 2nd day. The West Vancouver property was a modest house, modest by Min-jae's standards, which meant it was still significantly nicer than anything Grace had lived in. Grace was in the kitchen when Amara arrived, making tea with the unhurried competence of a woman who makes tea the same way, regardless of which kitchen she's in. Her cat, a large orange animal named Persimmon, was asleep on a chair in the corner. Grace looked at Amara when she came in. At her face, at the way she carried herself, at the slight rounding beneath her sweater that was more visible now than it had been 3 weeks ago. "Sit down," Grace said. "You look like you've been up for a week." "About that," Amara said. She sat. Grace poured tea and sat across from her, and they were quiet for a moment in the way of two people who didn't need performance from each other. Are you all right? Grace said. Not the polite version. The actual question. I think so. Amara wrapped both hands around the mug. I'm sorry about all of this. The disruption, the men who came, they were very polite, Grace said. The tall one helped me find Persimmon's carrier. Amara looked at the cat. He's good at logistics. Is that what you call it? Grace's voice was dry but not unkind. The man you're involved with. Is he someone worth the trouble? The question sat in the kitchen air. He's someone who is trying to become worth it, Amara said finally. I don't know yet if that's enough. Grace considered this. Sometimes that's all you get, she said. Someone trying. Is it enough? Depends on the trying. Grace picked up her own mug. You're going back. Yes. And you're not running anymore. No. Grace nodded. Something in her posture acknowledged this, without commenting on it further. She was not a woman who elaborated when a shorter response would do. The cafe will be closed for a few weeks, she said. Come back when things settle. Amara looked at her. You're not afraid of the situation. I'm 72, Grace said. I've been afraid of plenty of things. This is just complicated. She picked up her tea. Complicated I can manage. On the third day, Amara went to Dr. Souza's clinic alone. Dae-hyun drove her. Security was at the perimeter. Two men she'd started recognizing by their postures rather than their faces. She walked through the clinic doors, and the doors closed behind her, and the Vancouver morning was outside, and she was inside. And for the first time in days, nobody was watching. Dr. Souza was in her office. She looked at Amara the way she always looked at her, with the specific attention of someone whose job was to find what was actually happening beneath what was being presented. Sit down, she said. Let's check you properly. The examination took 40 minutes. Blood pressure, cardiac monitoring, the full prenatal workup. Dr. Souza moved through it with the unhurried competence that Amara had come to rely on, in the same way she relied on Margaret Yuen's methodical precision, as proof that some things were exactly what they presented themselves to be. Afterward, she sat across from the doctor and let herself breathe. Everything is within normal range, Dr. Souza said. The valve is stable. The baby is measuring well for 18 weeks. She paused. Your stress indicators are elevated. That's not surprising, and it's not immediately dangerous, but I want you to take it seriously. I know. Physical, emotional rest where possible. The doctor's expression was careful. Are things resolving? Slowly, Amara said.
Slowly is fine.
Slowly is sustainable. Dr. Souza folded her hands on the desk. The security arrangement outside, is that ongoing? For now. I'm working on defining what it looks like long term. I need my clinic to remain my clinic, Dr. Souza said simply. I understand that your situation has unusual dimensions. I'm willing to accommodate reasonable security presence. I'm not willing to have my other patients affected. I understand. I'll make sure of that. Dr. Souza nodded. The thing she had was what Amara was learning to identify as a rare quality in people, the ability to acknowledge a difficult reality without either dramatizing it or pretending it wasn't there. One more thing, the doctor said. She opened a folder, slid a photograph across the desk. Amara picked it up. It was from today's scan. Clearer than the image from 3 weeks ago, the resolution sharper, the details more resolved. A face, almost. The curve of a cheek. A hand with 5 fingers spread open, as though testing the temperature of the space around it. Amara sat with it for a moment. Thank you, she said. She put it carefully in her bag, next to the other one. On the 4th day, she told Min-jae she was ready. He had been giving her space in a way that was clearly effortful for him. She could see it in the contained quality of his movements when they were in the same room, the careful restraint of a man who had strong instincts toward action and was choosing stillness instead. It was, she thought, the most concrete evidence she had seen of the trying that Grace had described. There are things we haven't talked about yet, she said. They were in the hotel suite. He was at the desk working. She was on the couch with her feet up, Dr. Souza's instruction, delivered with a specificity that left no room for interpretation. He set down his pen, turned his chair to face her. The wedding, she said. I canceled the one you booked. I know. I'm not saying no to marriage. I'm saying no to being handed it. She looked at him steadily. When it happens, if it happens, I choose the timing. I choose the form you ask me, not arrange me. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, said the estate, she said. When we go back, private wing bedroom, nursery, Bathroom, the study, off the bedroom. No cameras, no audio, no surveillance equipment of any kind. You have my word that I will not use those spaces to plan anything that undermines your security. You need to take me at my word. I do. That means if you put a camera in the nursery, there will be no cameras in the nursery. The words came out with a force she hadn't expected from him. Not controlled, genuine. Something about the nursery specifically seemed to have bypassed his management systems entirely. Not in any room our child sleeps in. She looked at him. Your father died when you were an infant, she said. Yes. You said your uncle brought your mother into the organization. When I was 4, he was quiet for a moment. My mother didn't choose it. She was brought in because she needed protection, and protection came with conditions. She spent 20 years inside a system that was not hers and never became hers. Amara looked at his face. You built an identical system, she said. Not as an accusation, as an observation. He looked at her steadily. Yes. Do you understand why? I understand it better than I'm comfortable with. He stood. Went to the window. The Vancouver view he'd been standing at for 4 days. The one she'd started to associate with him, processing things he couldn't manage sitting down. I know what it looks like from the outside. I built the same thing my uncle built, and I called it protection. And from the inside, she said, what does it look like from the inside? He turned. Looked at her. Like I've been trying to keep something safe that my father never had the chance to keep safe, he said, and doing it in the only language I know. The room was quiet. You have to learn another language, she said. I know. That's going to take longer than Margaret Yuan's 7 days. I know that too. He came back from the window, sat down not at the desk, but on the chair closest to the couch, close enough that she could see the specific quality of tiredness in his face, not sleeplessness, something older. Amara, I know I don't deserve what you're offering me. I'm not offering you something you deserve, she said. I'm making a decision based on what I believe is possible. That's different. He looked at her. What do you believe is possible? He said. She looked back at him. She thought about the kitchen at 7 in the morning, the library late at night, the penthouse floor, the canceled wedding, the 3 attorneys in Margaret Yuan's office, and the yellow legal pad, and the full disclosure that had made Holt visibly nauseous. The way he had handed her his phone and said clear tomorrow's schedule without knowing what tomorrow would cost him. I believe you are capable of becoming someone our child is not ashamed of, she said. I believe that is going to require you to dismantle things you've spent 20 years building, and that it will be painful and slow, and you will make mistakes. She paused. I believe I'm going to be furious with you regularly for the foreseeable future. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile exactly. Something adjacent. And she said, I believe the version of you that is possible is worth the version of this that is difficult. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I need you. Not the managed version, not the strategic admission. The thing underneath the thing, delivered without the architecture around it. She looked at him. I know, she said. That's part of the problem. He made the sound that was the closest thing she'd heard from him to actual laughter short, surprised out of him, genuine. Yes, he said. It is. They drove back to Seattle on a Thursday. Not by private jet, which is what Min-jae would have arranged in any ordinary configuration of his life. Amara had asked to drive. She needed the geography, the actual movement through space, the sense of covering ground deliberately rather than being transported from one controlled environment to another. Dae-yoon drove. Min-jae sat in the back with Amara. A second vehicle followed at a discreet distance. She watched Canada recede through the window. The border crossing took longer than it should have. She was aware of Min-jae's particular stillness during the crossing, the quality of someone who was accustomed to moving through official checkpoints with arrangements that smoothed the process and was now doing it without those arrangements, on ordinary paperwork, with a pregnant woman beside him and nothing special happening. The officer returned their documents. They drove on. The Pacific Northwest unwound outside the window, the green of it, the gray, the particular quality of light in this part of the world that felt like it was always either remembering rain or anticipating it. She pressed her fingers against the glass. Min-jae said nothing. She appreciated that. An hour south of the border, her phone, not the burner, her actual phone, which had been sitting in her bag since before Vancouver buzzed, with a message from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. This is Cho. I'm telling you this because I think you should know it rather than find out some other way. I'm leaving. Not to Shen or any connected structure. I've been in this life since I was 22 and I'm done with it. I don't expect you to care. I'm telling you because you were the only person in that organization who ever treated me like I could be different from what I was, and I don't think you even knew you were doing it. Care of yourself and your child. She read it twice. Then she put her phone down. She looked out the window at the passing geography. She thought about what Cho had seen in her that she hadn't known she was showing. The thing he'd described, treating someone like they could be different from what they were without knowing you were doing it. She had done that, she thought, because she had needed to believe it about everyone in that estate, including herself, including Min-jae, especially Min-jae. She thought about whether Cho would actually leave, whether a man who had spent 20 years inside a particular kind of life could dismantle himself from it through an act of will alone, or whether the architecture of it followed you in ways you couldn't anticipate. She thought, probably he will find it harder than he expects. And he will make it or not make it, based on things she couldn't predict from the back seat of a car going south on I-5. She put the phone in her bag. She didn't tell Min-jae about the message. Not because she was hiding it. She would tell him eventually. But because it belonged to her first. Because she was still learning which things she was allowed to hold for herself before they became part of the larger negotiation of their shared life. And this was one of them. The estate looked the same. She had been gone 21 days. She had crossed an international border, built a life, had it dismantled, stood in a penthouse, and a hotel suite, and a lawyer's office, and a doctor's clinic, and the back seat of a car, and made decisions that she would be living with for the rest of her life. The estate looked exactly the same as the day she left. She stood in the main foyer and felt that the way places held their form regardless of what had happened inside the people moving through them. The same marble floor, the same light through the windows, a sound scene, the same proportions and surfaces that she had learned to navigate with the fluencies of someone who lived somewhere rather than worked somewhere. Min-jae stood beside her. He was watching her face. "We're going to change some things," he said. "Yes," she said. "We are." She walked through to the kitchen. Not because she was hungry, she wasn't. Because the kitchen was where she had understood, in accumulated increments, what this place was and what she was within it. It seemed right to start there. She put on the kettle. Min-jae came in, stood near the counter, in the way he'd stood near counters with her for 8 months, close enough to be present, far enough to not impose. "I want to call Grace tomorrow," she said. "Of course. And I want Dr. Souza's clinic to have direct access to me. Not routed through your security directly. If something happens at 3 in the morning, I call her myself, and she comes, or I go. Yes. I want to meet with your legitimate business leadership, the shipping, logistics, real estate. I want to understand the actual scope of what's clean and what needs to be cleaned. Not because I'm going to run it. Because I need to know what I'm inside." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll arrange introductions next week. I'll arrange them," she said. "You'll facilitate." He looked at her. She looked back. "Yes," he said. Kettle came to a boil. She poured, the ritual of it. The specific tea, the specific mug, the temperature, was so familiar that her hands did it without instruction. She had made this tea hundreds of times in this kitchen. The familiarity should have felt like defeat, and it didn't. It felt like evidence. Evidence that she had been here before, and survived it, and understood it differently now. She held the mug. "Let it warm her hands." "Min-jae," she said. "Yes." The cameras in the east corridor, the secondary gate monitoring, the driver reporting system. She looked at him. "Those change by the end of the week. Not eventually. By Friday. I'll have Dae-hyun. I'll tell Dae-hyun," she said. "You authorize it, and I'll tell him directly. I want to do that myself." He absorbed this. Dae-hyun had been his instrument for 15 years, and she was asking to speak to him directly about structural changes to the security system, which was either a significant concession or a significant test, or both. "All right," he said. She drank the tea. The following months did not move smoothly. She had not expected them to, and she had not promised herself they would. Smooth was the word she'd applied to the version of events where everything resolved cleanly and the difficult things stopped being difficult once the right decisions were made. She knew better. Min-jae's restructuring was real this time. Margaret Yuan's final document was signed in the third week, and the provisions covered everything: the holding structures, the parental rights, the medical autonomy, the private spaces, the limitations on security monitoring, the asset protections in Amara's name. Holt reviewed it and made his objections, and Min-jae overruled him on 6 of the 7 points Amara's side had pushed on. Holt resigned the following week. Min-jae hired a new senior attorney, a woman's this time, which he did without comment and which Amara noticed without commenting on. Operational separation from the darker elements of the organization took longer. It was not clean. There were conversations she was not part of, an arrangement she chose not to examine too closely. Because she was not naive about the distance between intention and execution, and she had accepted that the transformation was going to be incremental and imperfect, and she was going to have to hold the line on the increments. She held the line. Twice in the first 2 months, she identified decisions Min-jae had made without telling her. Not dramatic ones, not things that threatened her directly, but the old pattern surfacing under pressure. Both times she named it immediately, and he acknowledged it, and they moved on without making it larger than it was. The third time in the 6th week, he told her himself. Came to find her in the library where she was working and then said, "I made a decision this morning that I should have told you about. I'm telling you now." She looked at him. "All right," she said. "Tell me," he told her. She responded. They disagreed on 2 points and reached a workable position on both. Afterward, she sat in the library alone and thought about how much effort it required for a man who had spent decades operating in total informational control to choose transparency, and how the choice didn't get easier just because it was repeated. It just got more practiced. And practiced was not the same as natural, but it was more reliable. And reliability was what she needed more than nature. Their daughter was born in June. Amara was in labor for 11 hours, which Dr. Souza managed with the same methodical competence she applied to everything, monitoring the cardiac situation with a vigilance that left Amara feeling, paradoxically, calmer than she might have been with less attention. Min-jae was in the room. She had not been certain she would want that until she was in the room herself and found that she did. Not because she needed him there, but because she wanted him to see it. The full reality of it, unreduced. The thing that could not be managed or arranged or controlled into a more comfortable version of itself. He sat in the chair beside her, and he held her hand, and he said almost nothing for 11 hours, which was exactly right. When it was over, when Dr. Souza placed their daughter in Amara's arms, and the room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet. At that moment, Amara looked at the face of the person she had been protecting since January. Not tiny fingers and a pearl string spine on a photograph. An actual face, red and creased and furious about existence, in the way of someone who had just been introduced to the world without being consulted about it first. She looked exactly like herself. Amara laughed. She hadn't expected to laugh. She had expected to cry, and she did that too. But the laughter came first, the recognition of a particular personality already asserting itself in the first 60 seconds of life. Min-jae was looking at the baby with the expression she had first seen in the penthouse, the one that had bypassed all his management systems and arrived unfiltered. "She's angry," he said. "She's going to be fine," Amara said. He looked at Amara. She looked back. His face was the face of a man who had spent his life building structures around things he was afraid of losing and had just encountered something he knew, with certainty, he could not structurally contain. Something that would require him to be different from what he had been, not as a negotiated concession, but as a basic condition of being in the room. "What's her name?" Dr. Souza said. Amara and Min-jae looked at each other. They had talked about names. They had not agreed on one. She had not pushed for agreement because she had not wanted to see her daughter first, had known something in her needed to see the face before the name could settle. She looked at her daughter. She said. Jamin Bennett Kang. Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Then yes. 7 months later, Amara drove herself to Vancouver. Not Dae-hyun. Not a security detail. She drove her own car, the one registered in her name, from the account that was hers on a route she had chosen. Gia was in the car seat in the back, small and serious and interested in the trees, going past the window with the focused attention she applied to everything. Min-jae knew she was going. She had told him the night before. He had said drive carefully. That was all. She drove carefully. Vancouver was doing the blue sky thing when she arrived. The cold morning clarity that she had come to associate with the particular weeks of her life that mattered. She found parking 3 blocks from Dr. Souza's clinic, put Gia in the carrier against her chest, and walked. The clinic was the same. The receptionist recognized her and smiled. Dr. Souza came out from the back before Amara had finished checking in. She looked at Gia with the expression of a woman who had tracked this particular life from its earliest photographs. Well, she said, there she is. Gia looked at Dr. Souza with the discerning regard she gave to most things. She looks herself, Dr. Souza said. That's exactly what I thought, Amara said. The appointment was routine. A postpartum checkup, cardiac monitoring, the kind of maintenance care that would continue for years and which Amara had stopped resenting and started simply accepting as a feature of her particular body. Her heart was the same heart it had always been. Imperfect, irregular, hers. Afterward, she walked to Grace Chen's cafe. It had reopened in September. New paint on the exterior, the same color but fresh. A small sign in the window that Amara recognized as Grace's handwriting. The cafe smelled the same as it always had, something with ginger and strong coffee and the underlying wood warmth of a room that had absorbed decades of meals. Grace was behind the counter. She looked at Amara, then at Gia in the carrier, and did what Grace did, registered the full picture without performing a reaction. Sit down, she said. I'll make something. Amara sat at the corner table. Gia, lulled by the warmth and the smells, was beginning the preliminary movements toward sleep. Grace brought tea and something in a bowl that Amara ate without asking what it was because she had learned that Grace's food was always correct. They sat together in the way they had sat before, the comfortable quiet of 2 people who didn't require performance from each other. How is it? Grace said finally. Amara thought about how to answer that. Sent Sanan. She thought about the morning 2 weeks ago when Min-jae had come into the private wing at 4 in the morning because he couldn't sleep and found Amara already awake with Gia and had sat down on the floor beside the rocking chair and stayed there for 2 hours in the dark without a word. Unseen. She thought about the week the board of his legitimate shipping division had tried to route a decision around her, and Min-jae had corrected that in a single conversation that she had not been present for but heard the results of. She thought about the meeting with his legal team in the 8th week where he had looked at a proposed arrangement and said, unprompted, this needs to go to Miss Bennett's attorney before I sign anything, and the room had rearranged itself around the statement. She thought about the arguments they still had, regularly, because she did not allow accumulated grievances to sit unaddressed, and he still had instincts toward control that required constant recalibration. She thought about the night 3 weeks ago, when she had said something she regretted, and he had said something he regretted, and they had both sat with the wreckage of it, and then slowly, imperfectly, without resolution continued. It's honest, she said finally. It's the most honest thing I've ever been inside. Grace looked at her. That sounds hard, she said. It is, Amara said. It's also the first time I've trusted the thing I'm inside. Grace nodded, picked up her tea. Gia had gone fully asleep against Amara's chest, the boneless absolute sleep of infants who have decided the current situation is safe. She drove back to Seattle in the late afternoon. The light on the water was the particular gold of the Pacific Northwest. At 4 o'clock in the season between summer and fall, the angle of it doing something to the surface that made it look hammered, like a material rather than a liquid. She drove through it with the radio off and Gia asleep in the back, and her hands easy on the wheel. She was aware, somewhere in the middle of the drive, of what it felt like to not be looking in the rearview mirror, not the mirror mounted on the windshield. She checked that regularly, as all drivers did. The other mirror, the internal one, she had been consulting compulsively for months. Is anyone following? Is the route safe? Does the path behind me indicate what the path ahead will require? She was aware that she had stopped doing it at some point between Vancouver and the Washington state line, and that she didn't know exactly when, and that the not knowing was itself a kind of information. The estate came into view as she turned off the main road. It looked the same as always. It would probably always look the same. Some things about it were different. The cameras on the east corridor gone, the secondary gate monitoring restructured, the driver reporting system dismantled in a conversation with Dae-yoon that had been brief and professional, and had left her with a complicated respect for a man she still did not fully understand. The building itself looked the same, and she had made her peace with the fact that transformation was interior and did not always announce itself architecturally. She pulled through the gate. Min-jae was outside. She hadn't expected that. He was standing near the entrance with his jacket on, not because he'd been waiting. He had things to do. He always had things to do, but she understood that he had arranged to be there. That he had known what time she'd be back and made himself available at the exterior of the building instead of waiting inside because she had asked him once, very early in the negotiations, to stop treating her returns as arrivals he managed from within and start treating them as moments she chose. He'd been practicing. She parked, she got out, opened the back door, lifted Gia carefully from the carrier. She had learned to do this without waking her, and managed it, the small weight settling against her shoulder. Min-jae walked toward her. He looked at Gia first. He always looked at Gia first, which was something she had noticed and not commented on, and privately thought was exactly right. Then he looked at Amara. "How was Vancouver?" he said. "Good," she said. "Dr. Souza sends nothing. She doesn't actually send things, but the visit went well. Grace made me eat something unidentifiable and correct." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. He reached out and took Gia with the fluency of a man who had spent 7 months learning how, who had come into it with no instincts for it, and had built them through sheer repetition, through 4 a.m, sitting on the floor, and sleepless halls, and the patient, unglamorous work of being present from something that didn't care about his authority, or his network, or anything he had built. Gia didn't wake. She turned her head against his shoulder, and her hand found the lapel of his jacket and held it. She held things she'd decided were hers. Amara watched this. She thought about a different black car on a different night, the night she had entered Min-jae's world, because exhaustion and desperation had made his protection look like salvation. She thought about what she hadn't known then, and what she knew now, and what the distance between those 2 points had cost, measured in months and miles in every negotiation and argument and concession and held line. She thought about the ultrasound photograph, the one from 16 weeks, the curved spine and the thumbnail finger still in her bag, because she had never stopped carrying it, a habit that had outlasted its original purpose and become something else. Evidence of a starting point, a before image. Min-jae was looking at her over the top of Gia's head. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. He extended his free hand, not to take her anywhere, not to guide her or retrieve her, place her inside the next arranged moment. Just extended it. Open, waiting, she looked at it. She thought, this is not the ending of anything. She thought, this is what it looks like when something starts, for real, after all the other starts that were not quite real. She thought about all the versions of herself that had existed in the past year. The exhausted waitress, the frightened new hire, the woman who had packed a duffel bag in the dark, the woman who had crossed a border on her own, the woman who had walked into a penthouse and begun fighting for terms, the woman who had sat in a cafe in Vancouver and learned what honest felt like. She was all of them. She put her hand in his, not because he owned her, not because she had failed to escape him, not because the math of her circumstances had finally reduced her options to one, because she had looked at every available version of her life with clear eyes and chosen this one, because choosing freely and with full knowledge was the only form of this that she was willing to live inside. Because if she was truly free to leave, then her decision to stay meant something. The gate was open behind them. She could feel the weight of the road still in her feet, the miles she had driven alone through the blue Pacific Northwest afternoon, with her daughter asleep and her hands on her own wheel. She held his hand. She walked through her own front door.